Everyone on the plane thought he was just an old man who had wandered into the wrong seat, until a voice over the intercom said, "Vin Diesel's father, please proceed to the gate." That was the moment everything changed, but it began long before that. Ezekiel "Zeke" Morgan stood quietly in the first-class boarding line at JFK Airport's Terminal 4. The din of early morning travelers filled the air. Clicks of suitcase wheels, buzz of overhead announcements, muffled conversations in multiple languages. At 67, Zeke was composed still, dressed in his Sunday best, a neatly pressed windbreaker, khakis, and a button-down shirt with a collar stiffened more by habit than starch. He didn't look like wealth. He looked like dignity, but in that space, among Rolexes, designer luggage, and silk scarves, dignity didn't count for much. Tiffany Holbrook saw him immediately. She stood behind the American Airlines first-class counter, with the poise of someone who'd long ago decided she was the gatekeeper of who belonged. Her scarf was tied flawlessly. Her smile was tight and precise, like a blade dipped in sugar. "Excuse me, sir," she said, stepping forward, her tone one notch above patronizing. "This is the first-class boarding line." Zeke nodded gently. "Yes, ma'am. That's what my ticket says." She extended her hand. He passed her the folded paper boarding pass. Her eyes flicked down. "Seat 2A. First class." She paused. The truth was there, but her face betrayed reluctance. Still smiling, she said, "Well, just to be sure, I'll double-check the manifest. We've had some printing issues recently." Then, louder, as if for show, "Would you mind stepping aside, Mr. Morgan? We'll finish boarding the confirmed first-class passengers first." He stepped aside and watched. One by one, other passengers approached, men in crisp suits, women in heels and Chanel. To them, Tiffany offered wide smiles, effortless warmth. "Mr. Dempsey, welcome aboard. Can I take your bag?" "Good morning, Ms. Calloway. We've prepared your special meal request." "Oh, absolutely. Let me stow that for you." She leaned across the counter, laughed easily, nodded with reverence at black credit cards and expensive leather satchels. "Zeke?" Zeke stood to the side, invisible. When the final passenger had boarded, Tiffany gave him a slight nod. "Okay, Mr. Morgan, you may board now." No apology, no eye contact, no offer to assist. Zeke made his way slowly down the jet bridge. Inside the aircraft, he paused briefly, scanning for his seat. 2A window. He hoisted his carry-on, a worn but sturdy duffel, toward the overhead bin. The handle caught on the lip of the compartment. He tugged. The edge scraped his knuckle. Blood rose just beneath the skin. No one moved. A flight attendant passed by, young, male, in a tailored uniform. He locked eyes with Zeke, saw the struggle, then looked away. Across the aisle, a white man in a sport coat stepped aside so the attendant could lift his suitcase and stow it for him. Zeke finally got his bag in place with a soft grunt. He sat down slowly, knees creaking from years of teaching drama in rickety high school auditoriums and folding metal chairs. No water was brought to him, no smile, no welcome aboard. He sat quietly. He thought of Delora, his late wife, Vin's mother. She would have chuckled. "Still teaching the world patience, Zeke?" He thought of all the kids he coached through lines they didn't believe they could remember, kids who wore too many burdens on too little sleep. He had never needed a spotlight. But watching this moment unfold, he felt its heat anyway. A pair of passengers seated behind him murmured something. He didn't hear the words, but he caught the tone. A chuckle, a sneer. Zeke exhaled deeply and closed his eyes. The cabin filled steadily. Tiffany passed through again, this time helping a woman in heels lift her Louis Vuitton carry-on. She smiled down at her. "Anything else I can help you with, Ms. Halber?" Then she turned to Zeke with a glance that barely skimmed his presence. The intercom crackled overhead. "Final boarding call for American Airlines Flight 105 to Los Angeles. Passenger Ezekiel Morgan and guest, please proceed to Gate 42." Heads turned. Zeke didn't flinch. He knew what was coming. The cabin door opened again. Boots. Leather jacket. A stride with gravity behind it. Vin Diesel walked on board like the space bent around him. The plane fell silent, not because of celebrity but because of something deeper. Presence. He carried no entourage, just a duffel and a stormy look on his face. He walked directly to Zeke. "Sorry I'm late, Pops," he said, pulling Zeke into a firm, familiar hug. Zeke patted his back. "You're here. That's what matters." Tiffany appeared, clipboard clutched tight. "Mr. Diesel?" she said, voice suddenly breathless. He turned to her slowly. "I didn't realize," she stammered, "that Mr. Morgan is your father?" Vin didn't blink. "He's not just my father, he's the reason I became who I am." She opened her mouth, then closed it. Vin's voice dropped, quiet but sharp enough to pierce steel. "You let every single person walk by with champagne in their voice, but you made my father wait, carry his own bag, struggle with his luggage while your staff watched." Tiffany swallowed hard. "I didn't mean—" "You didn't see him," Vin cut in. "And that's worse." Zeke placed a calm hand on Vin's arm, but his son wasn't finished. "This man taught theater to kids the world gave up on. He paid for acting classes out of his own pocket when we didn't have money for heat. He earned that seat. Probably more than anyone else here." Tiffany's eyes dropped to the floor. Vin stared for a moment longer, then looked at his father. "Ready?" Zeke nodded once. "Always." They sat together, side by side, and as the aircraft taxied down the runway, no one said another word to Zeke Morgan, but they all saw him now. The plane ascended smoothly through the dense New York sky, cutting into the morning clouds as if it had something to prove. Inside the first-class cabin, conversations that had once flowed freely now ran dry. Eyes that had earlier darted toward Ezekiel Morgan with skepticism now quietly avoided his gaze. Zeke didn't bask in it. He simply leaned back in his seat, his hands folded loosely on his lap, his book untouched. Next to him, Vin scrolled through his phone, then locked the screen, resting his head against the seat. He had said what needed to be said, and Zeke, in his quiet strength, had said even more by saying nothing at all. The silence between them wasn't awkward, it was earned. The bond between them had never required words to be understood. A flight attendant, not Tiffany, approached cautiously. Her name tag read, Maria, and unlike the others, her eyes held no judgment. "Mr. Morgan," she said softly, "can I offer you anything? Juice, coffee, maybe some breakfast?" Zeke looked up, surprised by the sincerity in her voice. "Black coffee would be great. Thank you, Maria." She nodded and disappeared, returning moments later with a steaming cup. "And something for your son?" "He'll want orange juice," Zeke said with a knowing grin. Vin chuckled beside him. He's right. Every time. Maria gave a genuine smile. "Let me know if you need anything." Zeke nodded. "We will. Thank you for your kindness." It was a small moment, but it landed deeply, not because it erased what happened earlier, but because it stood in contrast. A reminder that one person's decency can soften the bruise left by another's prejudice. As the flight stretched westward, Vin leaned over. "I'm glad you came." Zeke looked at him. "I told you, you didn't even have to ask." "Still," Vin paused. "Today's important." Zeke's brow lifted. "So what exactly is today?" Vin looked ahead, hesitated, then said, "They're naming the new Performing Arts Center after you." Zeke blinked. "After me?" "Yeah. The one in the Bronx. Right where the old recreation center used to be. The one you built from nothing. It's finished. The city's doing a whole event. Press, students, former alumni, even the mayor's coming." Zeke turned toward the window, quiet, The clouds below seemed to stretch endlessly, like a soft road paved just for him. "You didn't have to do that?" "I didn't," Vin said. "They did. I just gave them a little push." Zeke didn't speak for a while. When he finally did, his voice was quiet. "Do you remember what that place looked like in '88? No heating, holes in the ceiling, rats bigger than the damn stage props." Vin smiled. "Yeah, you gave us broomsticks and had us pretend they were swords." Zeke laughed, a deep rumbling sound that filled the space around them like an old jazz riff. "Because imagination was free, and courage cost too damn much." Vin looked at him. "You gave both." Zeke nodded once. "I tried." They flew in silence for a while, each lost in memory. For Zeke, the memories came in fragments. The first time he unlocked the doors to the rec center, the smell of fresh paint and borrowed costumes. The way a 12-year-old Vin had struggled with his lines until he didn't. For Vin, the memories were louder, more vivid. His first standing ovation, the pride on Zeke's face when he made it through a monologue without freezing, the nights when they had no dinner but a full rehearsal schedule. A sudden turbulence jolted the cabin. Just a brief shake, but enough to stir passengers. A nervous laugh came from someone across the aisle. The old man, who had earlier smirked at Zeke, now clutched his armrest like it might save him. Zeke barely flinched. Vin glanced over. "You okay?" "Son, after 30 years of working with middle school theater kids who forget every single line on opening night, this is a breeze." They both chuckled. Maria returned later with warm towels and a knowing look. "We'll be descending soon," she said. "Shouldn't be long now." Zeke nodded, but his mind wasn't on the landing. It was back on the ground, back in the Bronx, back in a time when none of this seemed even remotely possible. He looked at Vin. "Do they know?" "Who?" "The kids. The ones who'll walk into that building next week. Do they know what it cost?" Vin was quiet. "Number. And they shouldn't. They just need to walk in with their heads high, knowing that stage is theirs, that space is theirs, that someone before them fought to make it happen. They'll feel it, even if they don't know it." Zeke's eyes misted, but he blinked it away. "You turned out all right." "Took a while," Vin replied. "But I had a damn good teacher." The pilot's voice came over the intercom, announcing the final descent into Los Angeles. Zeke tightened his seatbelt. The sun blazed over the wing, casting gold across the clouds. As they began to dip lower, the landscape of California spread beneath them. Mountains, highways, grids of rooftops. The contrast between sky and soil, dreams and struggle. A city that had chewed up and spit out 1,000 hopefuls, but had made space for one boy from the Bronx and the man who believed in him. As the wheels touched down, a soft cheer rippled through the cabin, the usual release of tension. The plane taxied toward the gate, and people began unbuckling, stretching, collecting their things. Zeke stayed seated. So did Vin. No rush. No need. Tiffany reappeared. Her face had changed. The confidence was still there, but it was muted, tempered by reflection. She stopped beside their seats. "Mr. Morgan," she said quietly, "I want to apologize. I was wrong earlier. About you. About everything." Zeke looked up at her. "What did you think I was?" She hesitated. I thought you didn't belong. And I'm sorry for that." Zeke didn't answer right away. He simply studied her face as if deciding whether the apology was real. Finally, he said, "Sometimes the world teaches you lessons in ways you don't expect. Today was one of them, for both of us." She nodded slowly. "Thank you." He gave a small smile. "You're welcome. Just remember, manners travel farther than planes." Passengers began moving out. Maria stopped by with a hand on Zeke's shoulder. "It was an honor, sir." He placed his hand over hers gently. "Likewise." As they stepped off the plane and into the terminal, cameras flashed immediately. A small crowd had gathered near the gate, reporters, students, former alumni. A banner stretched across the railing. "Welcome Ezekiel Morgan, the heart of Bronx theater." Vin leaned over. "Told you it was kind of a big deal." Zeke laughed. "You still could have warned me." "You would have said no." Vin smirked. "And you're not getting out of the speech either." Zeke groaned. "You never stop putting me on stage." "Because that's where you belong," Vin said. "That's where you've always belonged." They walked together toward the crowd, toward the celebration, toward the legacy. And for the first time in a long time, Ezekiel Morgan wasn't asked to step aside. The sun was beginning its slow descent over Los Angeles, casting a warm amber hue across the city as Ezekiel Morgan stepped onto the pavement outside LAX. The applause hit him before he could even take it all in. Flashbulbs popped like miniature fireworks, and faces, some familiar, many not, beamed at him with admiration and gratitude. There were former students now grown and gray at the temples, others in college sweatshirts, and a few in full suits who looked like they'd stepped right out of downtown law offices. They had all come back for him. He had always taught them that the greatest stories are the ones that stay with you long after the curtain falls. Now, standing there beneath a banner that bore his name in bold letters, he realized they hadn't just remembered the story, he had become part of theirs. Vin stood beside him, proud but quiet, letting the attention fall where it rightfully belonged. Zeke wasn't used to this kind of spotlight. In the theater, he had always stood in the wings, holding the cue book, whispering lines, fixing props, giving hope. He'd been the quiet force behind hundreds of performances, the steady hand in the chaos of nerves and bright lights. But now there was no backstage to slip into. This time, he was the act. A black SUV was waiting, courtesy of the city. The driver opened the door for him with more reverence than most gave celebrities. As they drove through the streets of South Los Angeles, then east toward the Bronx Theater Annex, Zeke gazed out the window in silence. His heart beat slowly but heavily, like a drum that had been waiting its whole life to be heard. The theater was nestled in the heart of a neighborhood that had seen everything from riots to revival. It stood now freshly painted in warm tones of brick red and gold, with brand new posters on the front doors and lights that had been installed just last week. The city had done it right. They hadn't turned it into some sterile auditorium with polished marble and chrome finishes. They'd kept the charm, the old stage, the creaky floorboards, the character, the spirit. When they pulled up to the curb, another round of applause burst forth from the crowd gathered outside. There were kids holding signs that read, "Thank you, Mr. Morgan," others handing him printed programs with his photo on the front. He took one, held it in his hands, and stared at it for a long moment. "That's my high school picture," he muttered to Vin with a chuckle. "You look like you could have played Frederick Douglass and Malcolm X in the same damn play," Vin teased. "I did," Zeke smirked, and the two shared a laugh that came from a place deeper than memory. Shared struggle, shared growth. Inside the theater, the air was thick with emotion. The seats were filled, the lights dimmed, and, on stage, stood a podium. Zeke was guided down the aisle as the audience rose to their feet in a standing ovation that seemed to stretch forever. He didn't wave, didn't bow. He just nodded with a quiet humility that said everything. They didn't cheer for a celebrity, they cheered for the man who had made them believe in themselves. Vin gave a brief introduction. Nothing grandiose. Just a few words about legacy, resilience, and the man who taught him how to command a stage before he ever set foot on a film set. Then it was Zeke's turn. He stepped up to the podium slowly, his fingers brushing its sides as if to steady both it and himself. "I never expected anything like this," he began, his voice low but clear. "I came to the Bronx in 1977 with nothing but a degree in drama and a heart that still believed art could change lives. Some people laughed, some ignored me. Most just thought I was wasting my time on kids who didn't want to be saved." He paused, letting the silence sit. But they were wrong. Every kid who walked through those doors was worth saving. Not because I said so, but because they had stories, real ones, hard ones, beautiful ones. All they needed was a space to speak them. That's all I did. I gave them the space. He looked out into the crowd, and his eyes softened. Some of you became actors. Some of you became lawyers. Some of you are raising families and paying bills and keeping your heads up in a world that still doesn't always see you. But I see you. I've always seen you. Another pause. He didn't rush. You don't need money or fame to be remembered. You just need to show up. Again and again. With love. With consistency. That's legacy. It's not what they put on your tombstone. It's what they carry in their hearts after you're gone. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. Some cried openly. Others just bowed their heads, holding back tears with trembling smiles. When the ceremony ended, Zeke walked slowly through the theater, past photos of former students on the wall, past signed playbills, past murals painted by kids who had found their voices in this very building. One mural showed a figure on a stage with the words, "Speak the truth, even if your voice shakes," painted in bold strokes behind them. Outside, the evening air was cooler now. The crowd was thinner, but a small group remained. Among them was Maria, the flight attendant from earlier. She approached quietly. "Mr. Morgan," she said gently, "I just wanted to say thank you. I didn't know your story when I served you, but I felt it. You carry something. I could tell." Zeke gave her a warm smile. "Thank you, Maria. That means more than you know." She hesitated, then added, "I told Tiffany what you told me. About dignity, about how we treat people. She needed to hear it." Zeke nodded. "We all need reminders sometimes. The trick is listening." She smiled and left, and Zeke stood alone for a moment beneath the theater marquee. Vin joined him holding 2 cups of coffee, black, just the way Zeke liked it. "You did good, Pops," Vin said, handing him the cup. "I didn't do it alone," Zeke replied, sipping slowly. "You made sure they remembered?" Vin looked out over the quiet street. They were never going to forget. "Not really." Zeke nodded. "Still, it feels good to know it mattered." It always did. The two stood in silence for a while, side by side. No cameras, no applause. Just 2 men. One legacy. One night, carved into memory. Zeke took a deep breath, as if filling his lungs not just with air, but with the weight and warmth of a life fully lived. "Let's go home," he said, and together they walked down the sidewalk, past the kids still taking photos in front of the theater, past the mural, past the shadows of the past, toward whatever was next. Because sometimes, the greatest act you ever perform doesn't happen on a stage. It happens in the quiet moments after the curtain has already fallen. Bully slaps a woman on the train, then realizes she's Vin Diesel's wife. You never know who someone truly is until it's too late. That's what every person on that train learned the hard way that Monday morning, when a cocky young man picked the wrong woman to humiliate, and the entire subway car found itself holding its breath as justice came wearing a leather jacket and walking in silence. It was just after 8 a.m. in New York City. The 4 train, coming in hot from Crown Heights Utica Avenue, was crammed as usual. Gray skies hung low over the skyline, and the scent of burnt espresso and wet pavement clung to coats and scarves. The subway doors hissed open at Atlantic Avenue Barclays Center, and more passengers squeezed in, shoulders brushing, earbuds in, eyes cast down. She entered without fanfare, a woman in her early 40s, quiet, composed. Her name was Elena, though no one knew it then. She had warm brown skin, dark hair pinned neatly, and a face that told stories without saying a word. She wore a simple black coat and carried a canvas tote bag against her chest like it held something precious, which it did. 2 red delicious apples, a fresh loaf of sourdough, and a jar of fig preserves she'd picked up from a tiny market near Prospect Heights after visiting her sister. She moved like someone used to being ignored. She wasn't flashy, didn't take up space, didn't invite attention. But she deserved respect, just like anyone else. Across from where she stood sat a young man sprawled out across 2 seats. His hoodie hung off one shoulder, bass-heavy music pulsing from the speaker clipped to his backpack. He didn't look up from his phone as Elena stepped closer and offered the politest voice the city rarely hears. "Excuse me," she said gently. "Would you mind moving over so I can sit?" He didn't flinch. "Train's full," he muttered. "Gotta claim your spot early." Then louder, as if speaking to the entire car. "Ain't my fault you slow." He stretched his legs out farther. No one said anything. A man beside him blinked behind his glasses and looked away. A teenager in a puffer coat watched silently, then went back to scrolling. Elena didn't argue. She just stayed standing, steadying herself on the pole. As the train pulled away from Nevins Street, it jolted. Typical for that part of the track. Elena's shoulder brushed lightly against the young man's arm. Barely a nudge. He recoiled as if she were diseased. "Yo, don't touch me, lady." Heads turned, then turned back just as fast. Elena's cheeks colored. She murmured, "I'm sorry," and tried to shrink smaller. But he wasn't done. "Y'all see this? Some people don't know how to keep their hands to themselves," he said, eyes flicking around the car like a stand-up comic, hungry for attention. Then he grinned, eyes locked on her tote bag. "What's in the bag, huh? Grandma groceries? Some prunes or something?" Elena clutched it tighter. "Please don't." He reached for it anyway, flicking the edge with 2 fingers. The bag shifted. One apple tumbled out, then the other. They rolled under seats, the way dignity does in moments like this. She dropped to one knee, slow and steady, trying to retrieve them. The young man leaned back smugly, watching. Just as she reached for the second apple, he swung his elbow back, sharp and fast. It hit her in the chest. She gasped and fell sideways into the subway door. Not a scream, not a cry, just the breath knocked clean out of her. The sound of her body hitting metal was dull, but it was the silence that followed that rang the loudest. Still, no one moved. Not yet. He leaned forward and smirked. Lesson of the day? Don't lean on people you don't know. People glanced around awkwardly. A woman clutched her purse tighter. A teenage boy bit his lip. A man near the back raised his phone, then thought better of it. And that's when something shifted. A man who'd been standing in the far corner of the train finally looked up. He'd been there the whole time, unnoticed, like a statue. Heavy leather jacket, boots planted wide, bald head, shoulders that looked carved from brick, eyes sharp, still, and now, locked in. He began walking, not quickly, not dramatically, just one slow step at a time. Past the college kid gripping his laptop bag, past the woman pretending not to hear, past the man who adjusted his glasses but said nothing the young man still didn't notice. "I'm just saying," he announced. "People act like being old means you get to do whatever, like you special or something." He reached toward the bag again, but this time, A voice cut through the subway like a blade. "Pick it up." The young man blinked, confused. "What?" The man was close now, 2 feet away, voice low, calm, dead serious. "The bag. Pick it up. And apologize." The thug turned his head, slow. The man staring back at him wasn't just anyone. "Yo," the other passenger muttered to the person beside him. "Is that?" The thug squinted. "What are you, her husband or something?" The man didn't blink. The thug laughed. "You her bodyguard? What you gonna do? Give me some fast and furious speech?" And that's when he said it. "I am Vin Diesel." The car went silent. Phones came out again. But no one was laughing. Another passenger, a stocky man in a Knicks hoodie, shifted uncomfortably and glanced toward the front of the car. "Someone call the conductor," he murmured. But no one moved. This wasn't the kind of moment where people reached for help. This was the kind of moment people watched, because something was unfolding, something you couldn't look away from. The thug's friend, the one in the zipped hoodie, took a step forward now, voice louder, bolder. "Yo, Dre, you good? Dude acting like he owns the train?" Dre glanced back, grateful for the backup. "Man thinks he's Vin Diesel," he snorted, talkin' all serious like he's about to narrate a monologue or some... But he never finished that sentence. Vin took a single step forward. Not fast, not aggressive, just one slow, certain movement. And that was enough. Dre stopped talking. The air in the car felt different. Like pressure had dropped. Like the moment before a thunderstorm. Vin's eyes didn't narrow. His voice didn't rise. But when he spoke, it cut through the air like a blade through silk. "You hurt my wife." That was all. 4 words. No threat. No rage. Just fact. Dre chuckled nervously. "Man, come on, I didn't mean nothing. She just bumped me, that's all." He tried to throw a glance at the other passengers, seeking support. Nobody met his gaze. Vin looked at Elena. "You okay?" She gave the slightest nod. "A little bruised," she said. Her voice was soft, but it carried. The subway car had gone completely still. No one even shifted their weight. Vin turned back to Dre. "Then you're going to fix it." Dre's eyes darted. "Fix what, man? You actin' like I broke something." Then, as if needing to prove he still had control, he laughed and bent down dramatically, scooping up the bruised apple with 2 fingers. He held it out to Elena with an exaggerated smile, then dropped it on the floor before she could reach it. "Oops." It rolled, hit the edge of Vin's boot, and stopped. The train clattered on beneath them, the rhythm of the tracks like a clock ticking down. Vin stared at the apple, then lifted his eyes. Dre shrugged. "Man, come on. You really gonna act like this is some kind of crime scene? Over fruit?" Vin didn't answer. He took another step forward, slowly lowering his voice. "Do you have a mother?" Dre blinked. "A sister?" Vin asked. "What's that got to do with anything?" Vin leaned in, quiet and cold. "Then you should know better." The crowd shifted again, an almost imperceptible movement of people adjusting their footing, leaning in just slightly, like instinct was telling them this was the edge of something big. That's when the second guy, the heavier one in the zipped-up hoodie, stepped in. "Yo, you trying to intimidate us? I don't care who you are, this ain't a movie, bro." He squared his shoulders like he'd seen people do in boxing matches. Vin's gaze flicked over to him. "I've seen worse than you." The man paused. He had expected to be barked at, shoved, maybe even threatened. But this calm certainty, it was something else, something he wasn't ready for. He looked to Dre for a cue, but Dre wasn't looking so sure anymore. A sudden jerk in the train's motion knocked everyone a little off balance, and in that moment, Dre lashed out. Maybe from fear, maybe from pride. He shoved Vin with both hands, hard. Vin took a half step back, not because he had to, but because he let it happen. He steadied himself like nothing had touched him. Dre hesitated. His bravado faltered. He tried again, another shove. Vin caught his wrist mid-motion. Not violently, not to hurt, just enough to stop it. And in that second, Dre understood exactly what he was up against. It was like hitting a brick wall. His eyes widened as he tried to pull back, but Vin didn't tighten his grip. He didn't have to. The second thug, sensing things were unraveling, lunged. Vin released Dre's wrist and turned, slipping under the second guy's arm and guiding his momentum straight into the side rail of the subway. He hit the metal with a sickening thud and crumpled. Dre stumbled backward, arms flailing, mouth open like he wanted to say something clever, but all the words had disappeared. Vin stepped forward again. "You should have walked away." Dre backed up until he hit the subway door. He looked around for support. No one offered it. Even the man filming earlier had lowered his phone, watching with his bare eyes now, not wanting to filter this through a screen. Elena, still near the corner, clutched her bag and watched her husband. She didn't call to him. She didn't need to. This wasn't about rage. It was about respect. And for people like Vin Diesel, respect was never optional. As Dre tried to shift sideways, bumping into a woman holding a stroller, another figure rose from the far end of the car. No one had noticed him before. Hoodie pulled tight, hands in his jacket. He walked silently through the aisle, like a shadow peeling off the wall. Then he stepped forward and swung. A short, thick baton, a mall cop's nightstick, sliced through the air and hit Vin square in the side of the head. The sound was dull, but deep. The entire train gasped. Elena screamed. Phones flew into the air. Vin dropped, his knees buckled, his shoulders smashed the pole. He fell hard, his head hitting the steel floor with a sickening bounce. For the first time, Vin didn't move, and the subway car turned to chaos. Vin's body lay still on the subway floor. The man with the baton stood over him, breathing heavily, face blank. Not smug, not angry, just cold. Around them, the entire car froze, voices rising in panic but movement suspended in fear. Elena dropped to her knees beside her husband. "Vin," she said, her voice cracking, hands trembling as she touched his shoulder. He didn't respond. The thug who had hit him glanced around the car like he was proud of the silence he'd created. A few people whispered, "Did he kill him?" But Elena didn't hear them. She was watching Vin's chest. And then it rose. A shallow breath. Then another. His fingers twitched, the barest motion against the floor. But it was enough. She leaned in closer. "Vin," she whispered. "Please." His eyes opened slowly, not wide, not dramatic, just enough to see her face. Then he blinked once, and it was like watching a storm return to the sea. The man with the baton took a step back, not out of guilt, but caution. Something had shifted. Vin didn't speak. He didn't groan or swear. He planted one elbow behind him, then the other, and slowly, like a man carrying more than his body weight, pushed himself upright. Blood streamed from his temple, down his cheek, staining the collar of his jacket. But his eyes were steady, focused, controlled. He used the pole beside him for balance, taking one breath then another. Then, slowly, he turned his head toward the man who had struck him. The thug shifted, gripping the baton tighter. He raised it again. Elena stood now, voice low but fierce. "Don't." It wasn't a scream. It wasn't a plea. Just one word, and it stopped the man mid-motion. He hesitated. Vin rose to his full height. The train rocked slightly on the tracks, but his balance didn't waver. His body swayed like a tree absorbing wind. The man swung again, but Vin stepped in too close for the baton to build force. His left hand caught the thug's wrist mid-air, holding it steady. Then he twisted, not violently, just precise. The baton clattered to the floor. The thug tried to yank his arm back, but Vin didn't let go. Instead, he took a step forward, placing a hand on the man's chest and shoving. Not with brute force, but with perfect aim. The thug staggered, lost footing, and slammed back into a pole, sliding down to one knee. He wasn't unconscious, but he wasn't getting up anytime soon. Vin didn't gloat. He didn't look at the crowd. He turned to Elena, took the crushed tote from her hands, and gently placed it on a nearby seat. One apple remained, bruised but whole. Then, slowly, he turned back to Dre, who was still frozen against the subway doors. Their eyes met. Dre's bravado cracked like thin ice. Vin took a step toward him. Dre scrambled sideways, tried to open the emergency door, slammed his palm against the panel in desperation. It didn't budge. The train hadn't stopped. The tunnel outside was still black. He turned back, wild-eyed, and threw a punch. Vin dipped to the side, letting the momentum slide past him. Then, in one fluid motion, he caught the man's arm, hooked his elbow around it, and twisted. A sharp crack echoed through the car. Dre screamed, crumpling to the floor, clutching his arm. Vin stepped back, not to admire his work, but simply to breathe. That made 3 down. The heavier thug, still crouched near the pole where he'd hit earlier, growled and lunged. Vin turned just in time to sidestep. The man flew past him, tripped on the legs of his fallen friend, and slammed chest first into a metal bench. The sound was ugly, air knocked from lungs, bones colliding with steel. He didn't get up. 4. The man with the baton stirred again. Rage burned now where cold calculation had been. He didn't bother with weapons this time. Just fists. He charged at Vin with everything he had. Vin waited. As the man swung wildly, Vin ducked once, rolled under a second punch, and then drove an elbow into his gut. The man gasped, folded, and Vin stepped into his space, delivered a shoulder check so forceful it sent the man sprawling into the wall. This time, he didn't move, not even to breathe hard. The subway car was utterly silent. No cheers, no clapping, just shock. Some people had recorded it. Others had forgotten they were holding phones at all. Vin stood near the center of the car, breathing steady, blood drying across his face, jacket torn at the shoulder. He turned slowly, eyes sweeping the space. No one challenged him, no one even blinked. He walked back to Elena, picked up the tote bag from the seat, and handed her the lone surviving apple. Her hand trembled as she accepted it, and then she looked at him. Not with fear, not with awe, just with love. She placed a hand on his arm. He exhaled, letting the weight of everything release from his shoulders. A teenage boy near the emergency door lowered his phone slowly. He looked at his mom. "Was that Vin Diesel?" She didn't answer right away. She was still staring at the man who had stood up, bled, and stayed standing. Finally, she nodded. "Yes, baby, I think it was." At the far end of the car, the first thug, the one who had knocked the groceries, who had laughed when she fell, was still curled up near the door, holding his elbow, eyes wide, mouth slightly open. He wasn't sneering anymore. He wasn't talking. He wasn't even pretending he understood what had just happened. He looked at Vin like someone who had just realized the lion wasn't in a cage, and never had been. Vin didn't look back at him. He didn't have to. He stared ahead, toward the front of the train, waiting for the next stop. The speakers crackled overhead. Next stop, Grand Central 42nd Street. The crowd shifted but stayed quiet. No one dared move. Vin turned to Elena. "You ready?" he asked softly. She nodded. "Always." He placed a gentle hand on the small of her back. The doors opened with a hiss. The two of them stepped out together. No one blocked their way. No one tried to follow. No one asked for a selfie. They just watched as the couple disappeared into the morning light of the station, boots tapping against tile, shoulders brushing side by side. A man in a suit near the front of the car slowly pulled out his earbuds, like the music he'd been listening to no longer mattered. A woman near the pole clutched her toddler closer. She didn't speak, but her eyes were glassy. At the far end, one of the earlier thugs coughed and immediately winced, as if the sound itself was dangerous. The train doors shut. The car rattled on, but the silence wasn't awkward anymore. It was reverent. A few phones were raised again, but not to go viral. Just to remember. Because for the rest of their lives, the people on that train would carry the memory of what they saw that day. They wouldn't remember the exact words. They wouldn't need to. They would remember the stillness, the weight of quiet strength, the way a man bled and still stood, protected, not with rage, but with resolve. Outside the train, Vin and Elena moved through the grand central concourse like any other couple. The world bustled around them, commuters rushing, tourists snapping photos, vendors shouting about bagels. No one knew what had just happened below. No one needed to. Vin pulled out a crumpled shopping list from his jacket pocket, unfolded it slowly. It had a streak of red across one corner. He looked at it, then at Elena. "Still want those apples?" She smiled faintly. "Only if they're ripe." He nodded. "They always are." And with that, they stepped into the city. No spotlight. No fame. Just two people walking side by side through a world that had no idea how lucky it was to share a sidewalk with them.